Vegapunk's final broadcast wasn't just a warning about rising sea levels, it was the single biggest lore dump in One Piece history, and Oda hit a ton of important clues right under our noses, so I've decided to piece together everything that you might have missed in Vegapunk's final message and what it probably means for the end of One Piece. And really, I think we can break down this monstrosity of a lore dump in the story in 5 main sections, starting with the first one, Vegapunk's confession, and the world is sinking. And it starts in chapter 1113, where Vegapunk drops a banger of an opening. He says,
I have committed 2 sins, therefore, whether I am arrested or executed, I shall program this message to be broadcast when my heart stops beating. I want to make one thing very clear first. Whoever may have rendered said judgment unto me, I am not trying to convince you that their intent is evil. I will not apply the labels of good and evil at all, in fact, because I understand too little about him to begin with.
Alright, let's already stop it right there because this opening is massive. Vegapunk's basically saying, yeah, I'm guilty, I messed up, but I still need to talk to you after I'm dead, and that's kind of a bold way to kick things off. But right after that, he hits us with this curveball by basically saying, I don't know who's right, I don't know who's wrong, I won't call anyone evil here because I don't even understand both sides fully yet either. And that statement by itself is really wild, I think, because if the smartest man in the world doesn't know who was right or wrong during the Void Century, then what chance do we have? Like, bro, I usually can't even decide what I'm gonna have for lunch. That instantly, I think, tells us that the Void Century, Joy Boy, Emu, their entire conflict is actually way more morally complex than a simple heroes versus villains story. Or maybe we should have expected this because it's classic Oda. He's setting the stage here for moral ambiguity, and One Piece has always been about questioning who really holds justice, right? The world government just kinda slaps the justice label on themselves while covering up slavery and genocide. Pirates get called criminals, but sometimes they're the ones protecting people's freedom instead. Wait, haven't we actually heard this somewhere before? Didn't some pink flamingo guy say this exact same thing somewhere? Yeah, we haven't forgotten you, Dofi, and this also echoes what happened on Ohara. Remember Robin's professors? Just a bunch of nerds reading books, but they were branded as devils by the government, or the celestial dragons who call themselves God but act like literal trash. Vegapunk's first point is pretty clear. The truth of history isn't this black and white as we always like to think. And you just know, by the way, that Oda was smiling while writing this, like, good luck figuring out who the real villain is, guys, and if Joy Boy might have been a little bit evil too, or if Emu was actually misunderstood. It's gonna be a blast. Now, Vegapunk very clearly knew he was going to be considered a villain though, and he explains to the world exactly why he was killed in this section a little bit further forward. But before that, he drops kind of the main message of that entire section, which we get right at the end of chapter 1113, when he says,
To make a long story short, the world as we know it will sink into the sea.
And damn, mic drop moment right there. Now in the manga, this was actually the end of the chapter, and it set the entire community on fire for literal days. But let's continue here. He follows this up with,
In the days after I record this message, there should be a most remarkable earthquake that strikes the entire planet. As a result of that, the sea should rise about 1 meter around the world, rendering some islands uninhabitable. Beaches around the world will be lost for good. This particular earthquake is not exactly what I would call a natural phenomenon.
Okay, so Vegapunk just casually drops the line, oh yeah, the entire world, by the way, is gonna sink. Like, bro, you can't just throw that out there and then move on like that. That's not small talk, that's quite literally the apocalypse. But here's the thing, he actually does back it up with proof. By the time that people are hearing this, they've already lived through the global earthquake and the 1 meter sea rise after the Lucia. That quite instantly establishes a lot of credibility for what he's saying. He's not just a doomsday guy shouting into the streets, he's predicting the exact disaster that quite literally happened days ago. And when he then says that this isn't natural, that's really the real gut punch here, because now we're starting to connect some dots. You remember Lucia, right? That whole island that was erased by a mysterious light from the heavens? Everyone thought it was some crazy natural disaster, but here Vegapunk basically tells the entire One Piece world, yeah, no, that's not something that should be happening on your average Tuesday in the One Piece world, actually. Which I think should make a lot of sense to the citizens too. Like, imagine hearing this broadcast and looking outside and yeah, I think the guy's got a point because my beach house is literally gone. It's underwater now. But what Vegapunk is really doing here is priming the audience for the much bigger reveal to come, that these disasters are tied to ancient technology and the Void Century itself. The rising sea levels are not random. They're part of a repeating cycle, one that's actually tied to the Mother Flames and the ancient weapons. Then of course we get a real sad point here where Vegapunk kind of breaks down and admits why he feels that he has sinned against the entire world.
This was the root of my first sin. I dreamt of a source of endless, eternal energy. And in my desire to push the world forward into the future, I flew too close to the sun. Allow me to explain just what it is that is happening to our world. From about 900 years ago to 800 years ago, a period of a century, there is a span of history that is completely and entirely blank. We call this the Void Century because all records from this time were eliminated. The only means to know this lost piece of history is to find a message from the past in the form of poneglyphs scattered across the world and decipher its contents. However, the world government has made it a crime of the highest order to decipher the message of the poneglyphs, and despite being a member of the government myself, I broke the law. That was my second sin.
Alright, this is actually the meat of it. Okay, Vegapunk lays out two sins here. First, creating an energy source, we do know that this is the Mother Flame, and second, breaking the law by studying the poneglyphs. Now, here's the part that really caught my attention when I first heard it. Neither of these things are actually inherently bad, right? Energy isn't inherently evil, but in the hands of someone like, say, the world government, well, that's when it becomes really, really dangerous. Like, imagine inventing solar panels and then the government, I don't know, making mega death lasers from the same technology. Kind of cool, but it's evil enough, which is why Vegapunk considers it a sin in his very own eyes because he's a pacifist, though he built a lot of weapons for being a pacifist. Beside the point. He basically helped the government build a super weapon, is my point here. And this is actually also a direct parallel to Professor Clover back on Ohara. Clover's big crime was simply digging into the Void Century and the Forbidden Past. Both Clover and Vegapunk are both branded as sinners, not because they hurt people directly, but because they challenged the world government's monopoly on the truth. And I really love how Oda makes Vegapunk's voice line up with Robin's past here, because when Vegapunk admits his second sin, you can almost feel the weight of Robin's tragic backstory. She's quite literally the last Ohara scholar still carrying that knowledge, well, and me, and now we see the world's smartest scientist falling into that very same crime that she committed too. But remember, like Frankie told Robin back in Enies Lobby, it's not a crime to simply exist and be curious. And in this case, it shouldn't be a crime to learn information and share it with the world. So in short, Vegapunk is guilty of wanting progress and wanting truth, but he views what he has done as a sin because of what the world government has done with his creations. Or maybe he feels just guilty that he kind of knew that this would happen, but all of that ties directly into the next part of the speech, which is section 2, the Void Century and Joy Boy. So let's hear how Vegapunk continues his speech.
I inherited some texts and a number of poneglyphs, which I have deciphered and continued studying to the best of my ability. I regret none of this. History, you see, tells a story. In other words, what I know is an incomplete story of that 100-year void. It would be dishonest to fill the blanks with my own speculation, so I will leave you only with the verified truth.
Now, when I first heard this part, I was actually literally screaming no at my computer screen. Like, tell us what you think. Give me all the juicy speculation, but I guess that's just my chronic theory brain leaking. But he did give us a crazy confirmation in the next part, because he goes on to say here,
The main character of this story was born into a kingdom with an impossibly advanced civilization 900 years ago. Like the sun god Nika, spoken of in Elbaf legend, he fought with a body that stretched and contracted. His name was Joy Boy, and he was the very first man on the sea to be called a pirate.
That's right. Vegapunk just casually dropped the names Nika and Joy Boy, an ancient deity and the man at the center of the Void Century. That's actually quite insane. Keep in mind that Vegapunk is talking to your average Joe in the One Piece world here who doesn't know anything about these names. These people think usually that devil fruits are myths, right? So to casually reveal them after centuries of the world government trying to erase these names from history is pretty ballsy, I gotta say. They definitely tried to pull a Clover on him if he wasn't already dead. Kinda dead. It's Vegapunk. So right away, Vegapunk starts dropping lore that even we didn't 100% know about Joy Boy and the lost history, right? We learned that Joy Boy was, for instance, born into a kingdom that Vegapunk literally calls the Great Kingdom, the same kingdom that the 20 kingdoms went to war against 900 years ago. As for Joy Boy, we now know he didn't just exist, he actually fought like Nika with a stretchy body, which we kind of assumed since we thought Joy Boy had the Nika fruit too that now Luffy has. But the real wild part is the title that Vegapunk said Joy Boy has. He was the first pirate. Like, what? What are the implications here? Is it that he was literally the first person to ever sail off on the seas in this new flooded world? Or did he sail whatever water was around before the flood? Or maybe he was branded a pirate because he stood against the 20 kingdoms? Or maybe pirate is just propaganda from the victories of that war itself. You know, like the new rulers wanted to cast him as a bad guy, so they called him a pirate. After all, Roger gets called a pirate, but really, he was just kind of chasing freedom. Luffy gets called an evil, chaotic pirate who destroys nations, but really, he's just, being himself and actually helps most of these kingdoms that he visits and kind of saves a lot of people on the way. That's the real symbolism here, maybe, to the world government. Free men striving for freedom are criminals. Clover in Ohara was a scholar, but they branded him as evil and killed him for that sin. Joy Boy wanted freedom, so they called him a pirate. Luffy wants freedom too, so the cycle repeats over and over again, and it's kind of all part of the world government's old playbook, suppressing anyone who tries to challenge their rule. Know what I'm saying? And I really can't wait to see all of them get what they deserve, but as we already know, Joy Boy wasn't able to do that, even though he was probably very powerful. And Vegapunk actually tells us exactly that right here in this next part, because he follows the previous stuff up with this.
What I found, sir, was the record of a breathtakingly vast war. Joy Boy's enemy was the world government of the present day. More accurately, it was the precursor to the world government, a provisional army put together by 20 kingdoms known as the Alliance.
The entire speech is really insane. Vegapunk just straight up confirms it for the entire world. Like, again, keep all of this in perspective here. We pretty much knew this stuff already, right? But now the entire One Piece world knows part of what happened in the Void Century and how the world government was originally formed. This is how the final war is gonna really amp up anyways, when the entire One Piece world slowly starts learning about what's really going on. Now, here is where things get real nutty. Vegapunk tells us that the Alliance who fought against Joy Boy were the 20 kingdoms who then went on to create the world government, right? We already knew some of these families because, most of their descendants are now sitting on the top of the world as celestial dragons. The Nerona family, Don Quixote family, all the Gorosei families, and the other so-called noble lines are the same ones who actually once went to war with Joy Boy. But Joy Boy, of course, wasn't all out there by himself either. No, there's a ton of evidence actually that he had a lot of allies all across the globe, all tied together by the sun symbol surrounded by 8 orbs. a pirate needs a crew after all. And once you start really looking for it, that symbol here is everywhere. We've seen it in Alabaster's flag, we've seen it in Wano's symbol, we've seen it in Shandora, even Kuma's church had it carved in the cross. The sun symbol is the mark of Joy Boy and the resistance against the world government. And I mean, looking at his allies, they were mostly like the Giants, the Fishmen, the Minks, even the Buccaneers, basically all the most marginalized races that the world government now is trying to actively stomp out. They were all Joy Boys ride or dies during that big war 800 years ago. And then we have to think, of course, about why they even fought with him, right? The war wasn't just about land or power, we think. Vegapunk much more hints that the conflict might have been about technology itself. The Great Kingdom was so technologically advanced, it scared the living crap out of the other 20 kingdoms. Even the Gorosei admit that they feared the ancient weapons, and that's why they erased the Great Kingdom's name and all of its knowledge to kind of protect themselves from ever having to face it again. So yeah, the war was massive, the sights were pretty clear, and the stakes were quite literally the fate of the world's future. You think that Vegapunk would just outright say Joy Boy was the good guy, the 20 kingdoms were the villains, you know, good versus evil. That's where my head was at for most of One Piece too, but yeah, nah. Vegapunk throws an absolute curveball. He actually stops here and says this.
Without knowing the sparks that caused the war, I won't say who was right or wrong. I'll simply state that the two competing ideologies came head to head.
That's a pretty important reminder because at first it feels obvious, right? The 20 kingdoms are the villains, Joy Boy's the hero, but Vegapunk is really careful here. He's reminding us that history is very complicated. He's saying it might not have been so black and white after all. So am I saying that Imu might not actually be the bad guy of the story? I mean, maybe, or at least maybe back in the Void Century, they were not the pure evil king of the world that we now see them be today. Maybe the government as itself started out kinda good and then got corrupted over time. Now, of course, we already got some more context because in chapter 1085, we learned about Nefertari Lily, who defected from the 20 Kingdoms side and actually allied with Joy Boy. That defection is what supposedly then led to the poneglyphs being spread across the world, and we assume that Lily was a good person since, you know, she is an ancestor of Vivi, who we like very much. But then we also have to ask why she was on the 20 Kingdoms side originally in the first place either, right? If she was such a good person, did she not like what Joy Boy was doing? So maybe the 20 Kingdoms legitimately needed to stop Joy Boy to save the world. Like maybe Joy Boy was using the ancient weapons, not in a bad way maybe, but it was still destroying the world, so the Alliance had to stop him. That could explain why Lily was on their side originally, but then maybe the Alliance went too far or changed their true objective or got corrupted by Imu, and that then forced Lily to leave the Alliance and actually side with Joy Boy again or do her own thing maybe. But yeah, Vegapunk leaves the question very open and forces us to think, and in the process busts open the entire point of the final One Piece saga, which I absolutely love because we just don't really know what's going on. Like, what if Joy Boy wasn't just some pure messiah figure like we all think? Kind of like how Luffy doesn't view himself as a hero, right? What if the Great Kingdom really did create weapons too dangerous for the good of the world? And what if the 20 Kingdoms used that fear as their justification for erasing everything in return? You know, kind of saying, hey, we never want anything like that to ever happen again, but in the process creating a completely totalitarian and dystopian regime in exchange as well. Now, after Big Punk here leaves us hanging on who was right or wrong in the war and what actually happened, he drops something even bigger on us, not just why they fought in that war, but what happened because they fought. Here's the line.
The Void Century came to a close with the defeat of Joy Boy, but not before leaving vast, permanent scars of war across the face of the world. The world is made up of a series of islands. Sailing between them is difficult, and many people never experience anything but their own culture at home. But this shared understanding of the world does not necessarily apply to the world of 1,000 years ago, because a cataclysm occurred during the Void Century, causing the world to sink once before. We are currently living on the pieces of a continent that existed long ago. The world of a millennium ago now slumbers unseen at the bottom of the sea.
Dude, Vegapunk just confirmed that the One Piece world literally sank, and in the past, people lived in a much more connected world that we can't even imagine today. Because what do we have now? A shattered globe. Islands everywhere. Sailing between them is a nightmare, and most people never leave their home islands. Now, the world government, of course, absolutely thrives on that isolation. If the seas keep people separated, it's way easier to control them after all. And honestly, that kind of makes every single map in One Piece feel completely different now. I mean, we're literally looking at the ruins and leftovers of an ancient advanced world broken into pieces. Now, Vegapunk says that he himself can recreate those exact powerful ancient weapons, but I kinda doubt that, to be honest, because let's be real, we've seen pieces of them in the story. Shirahoshi is literally Poseidon reborn, so she's already an ancient weapon or part of one. Then of course we know that the Pluton blueprints still very much exist. We saw that with Frankie in Enies Lobby, and I kind of think that he's already built parts of those blueprints into the Thousand Sunny, I hope at least. Then we know that Enel built the Arc Maxime based on some ancient plans, which could absolutely be kind of like a flying death machine like Uranus. We see something very similar in the mural, right, on Elbaf. So can Vegapunk really not make something like the ancient weapons himself? I kind of think that he could if he really tried, but that would go completely against his peaceful nature. And then again, maybe the ancient weapons were built with something that truly doesn't exist anymore, maybe the power of ancient gods or something like that. So, we just talked about the Cataclysm that shattered the advanced One Piece world, breaking up continents into the scattered islands that we know today, but Vegapunk, of course, does not stop there. He then goes on to explain why this broken world is the perfect setup for what the world government did next.
Is the world was still the same as it was in the past, since the act of erasing 100 years of history would be simply unthinkable and impossible. However, it makes much more sense when you understand that the rise in sea level over that century was 200 meters.
200 meters. That's not just some coastline flooding, that's entire continents being swallowed up by the ocean. Whole civilizations gone, just buried under the sea. Look at this map right here that would show our world if the sea rose 200 meters right now. All that blue land is now just underwater, so bye-bye Eastern Europe. Also, by the way, in case you're curious, 12,000 years ago, the world did flood in our real world by 90 meters. It looked like this before, like Indonesia wasn't islands, it was just actually all connected. Japan was connected, really different world. And the sea levels rose really quickly 12,500 years ago during the Younger Dryas too. So imagine this twice. And so all of this kind of clicks, right? In the old world, when people lived on connected continents, there is no way you could erase an entire century of history. Too many people, too much travel, too much shared knowledge and culture. But once the world shattered into thousands, hundred thousands of isolated islands, suddenly it becomes way easier. Each nation only sees their own little pieces of the ocean, and the world government can control what stories actually survive. Which is why it is so thematically cool that the person who controls the world's newspaper is an albatross man who travels around the world in a flying balloon. Can't tie my man down, his pants and news are way too big. But more interestingly, we've of course seen many hints of these lost ancient civilizations all over the story. At least we do in the manga. The anime isn't always like as precise with it. Jinbei's cover story, for instance, showed sunken ruins under the waves. Even in the panels during Vegapunk's broadcast, we see many ruins hidden beneath the ocean. They're still down there, just waiting to be rediscovered. Now, let's tie all of this to Joy Boy's promise to the Fishman people. In case you don't remember, at the end of the Fishman Island arc, we learned about the giant ship Noah, truly giant, and Joy Boy's vow to the Fishman Princess and the Fishman in general, and that the Noah was needed for some promised time in the future. Now, originally the idea was that most likely this giant ship was meant to move the Fishmen up to the surface after the world sank, but kind of that doesn't make sense. They can just swim to the surface, and now I'm kind of wondering if the true purpose of the ship is to save millions of people from around the world from another worldwide flood. That makes way more sense for the size too, because the Noah genuinely is way bigger than all of Fishman Island together. So far in Vegapunk's message, we've seen that the world sinks, Joy Boy's role in all of it, and how history basically just got deleted. But now Vegapunk zooms in on the real cause, and this is the third section of our speech where things stop being a mystery and more start sounding like a doomsday confession of sorts, because Vegapunk just flat out says that the flood, the world sinking, all of it was not natural, everything was man-made. Here's the exact quote.
As for why the sea level rose so much during that century, it would be natural to assume the fact of a sudden natural disaster. But I can state for a fact that this was a man-made disaster. If such a cataclysm were caused by natural forces, since the initial disaster would have spanned several centuries and inflicted slow but continual damage upon the world. But by any measurement, climatology, geology, environmental and atmosphere science, this dramatic shift could not have happened within a single century.
Full stop. That part is insane. Vegapunk's not leaving any wiggle room here at all. He's not saying, oh, maybe it was natural, maybe it wasn't. No, he doubles down that this world-changing disaster was absolutely done on purpose and man-made. And the way that he backs it up is just really crazy. He's like, hold up. If this were some kind of natural climate event, it would have taken centuries to play out, maybe longer, but that's not what happened. The seas rose 200 meters in a single century. So, what does that tell us? The Void Century wasn't just a war, it was basically a reset of the entire world map. Someone, most likely intentionally, flooded the entire globe, sank continents, and forced humanity onto scattered islands, also resetting them basically to the Stone Age. And when you really think about it like that, the world government's erasure of history suddenly makes so much sense. If you do split everyone apart and scatter the survivors, you can erase entire civilizations without anyone remembering the full story and connecting the dots. And here's where the myth parallel gets absolutely wild, because it really seems like Oda drew a lot of inspiration from our own world myths when thinking about this worldwide flood, because rising sea levels, sinking cities, erasing history, ancient advanced civilizations. It all sounds like every great flood legend in our own world, which by the way exists in almost every culture of the world. We do know the sea levels rose. I mean, this is not the video for this, but it's very possible we actually had a great biblical flood, kind of like how it was described in the Bible, and again, pretty much every single ancient civilization there was. There's even the Mesopotamian myth Gilgamesh, where the gods flood the world but allow one man and his family to build a boat to survive. You know, and then restart and reset civilization. So clearly Oda took some heavy inspiration here, and he's also a big fan of conspiracy theories, so I think the idea of Atlantis and, you know, the fact that there were ancient, like technologically advanced civilizations maybe on our planet 12,000 years ago, Oda absolutely loves that stuff. But it also means that we can look at why those mythological floods happened and try to figure out why it happened in One Piece. Atlantis was supposedly sunk by the gods for their corruption and basically straight up arrogance against the gods themselves. And the biblical flood happened for pretty much the exact same reason. The people turned away from God and goodness, so he was like, well, let's reset things back to zero and give it another shot. A true great cleansing of the evil in the world, but you know, overshooting maybe a little bit by killing almost everyone and everything. So that could be exactly why the flood happened in One Piece 2. Humans were becoming more and more powerful with insane technology, becoming more like the gods, so someone, most likely the world government here, decided, hold up, we gotta start things over before we nuke ourselves off the entire planet maybe, which again just kind of feeds into the idea that maybe the world government weren't the purely evil bad guys that we see in the story today, but kind of started out with actual concern. You know what Luffy is like, right? Maybe Joy Boy was a little bit overexcited about everything and was the one steering the world towards disaster, so the world government had to take super extreme measures in order to stop him. Though unlike Joy Boy, you can steer yourself right into One Piece heaven by joining the Ohara Patreon, and by joining, you'll instantly get access to a ton of exclusive perks such as artwork, bonus content, a weekly newsletter, and a lot more, so go check it out if you want to support what we do here. With that shameless plug out of the way though, honestly, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I really can't help it. This was the single biggest lore drop we've ever gotten in One Piece, and we're getting confirmations of theories that fans have been crafting and speculating about for almost a decade. But even better, we're getting so much brand new insane lore that completely changes how we view the entire One Piece world and really the story overall. Like, Oda just decided to break the entire internet with this one big message. One Piece is basically a post-apocalyptic world if you want to look at it that way, and it's not even close to being over. And here's the next Vegapunk bombshell, because he just casually drops this line.
So the cause is something else, and then I detected the rise in worldwide sea levels the other day. I had my answer. I knew the cause and confirmed its existence. The ancient weapons that sank the world into the sea 800 years ago still exist today and await the moment that they stir once again. In other words, the vast wars that arose during the Void Century never came to an end.
Now that one truly gave me chills. This is Vegapunk connecting the dots and sharing them with the rest of the world. All of his research into the Void Century from the poneglyphs, all of his checking the geological marks that show the ancient flood, and now, boom, they got hit with another blast from the ancient weapons that shows that the world is about to get rocked by, yet another flood. Which means that this ancient war is actually far from over. Only now the entire world knows that they are in serious danger, like Sabo and the revolutionaries here, or Momo and Kinemon, everyone that we see during this flashback. Vegapunk's words make it very clear that the war never even ended to begin with, and the weapons that once sank the world are still waiting, ready to be unleashed. Now that's already terrifying enough on its own, but it also begs another question: what exactly are these weapons and how do they even work? Well, let's take another step back from the speech for a second and break down what we know already, because if these things are the cause of the Cataclysm, which seems to be implied, then we need to understand what each one brings to the table. So first up, we have Poseidon. We already know this one pretty well. It's the mermaid princess who can command the Sea Kings, and we already know that Pluton is supposedly this colossal battleship, supposedly trapped or sleeping beneath the walls of Wano. And then finally, Uranus, and this one's kind of the wild card because it's heavily implied to be that flying weapon that we saw used to destroy Lulusia, and it seems to need an energy source in order to be able to operate. Which kind of hints at the fact that it is probably a machine, right? Like, why else would it need a mega energy source like the Mother Flame? At this point though, Uranus is the one that most clearly is connected to a cataclysm on a global scale, because it literally raised the sea levels in the present day when it was used once by 1 meter. So here's the million-dollar question then. Can all the ancient weapons cause this level of destruction, or is there something more unique and special about Uranus that makes it the most devastating of all three? Now, Vegapunk, to be fair, doesn't single any of the three out here. He just says that the ancient weapons collectively are what sank the world, which implies that they're all equally dangerous at first glance, meaning any of them, if used recklessly, could potentially trigger another catastrophe. Or maybe each of them brings a different catastrophe. Maybe one floods the world, maybe another one burns it down. There might have been many cataclysms in the past of the One Piece world. And here's where it gets even crazier, because these weapons might be powerful on their own, but what if we haven't even come close to seeing their actual real potential? Because, hear me out. In the past, they were likely fueled by what we now know as the Eternal Flame, which might actually be tied to the Drums of Liberation, the heartbeat that Luffy has in his Nika form, which makes sense because Emeth only woke up when Luffy went into his Nika form, and he is ancient technology tied to Joy Boy. Now, if that's true, then the very essence of Joy Boy's power might have once been used to activate planet-busting weapons, so does that mean that Luffy is the one who will ultimately have full control of these weapons, or can only he unlock their full potential, but they can still be used and, used to destroy stuff otherwise anyways? Well, next comes maybe the most bittersweet part of Vegapunk's message yet.
I wanted to create the energy that would power the industry of the world to come, and so it is still incomplete. I have at last reached a practical stage of my life's work, the Mother Flame. A fire that never goes out. It is an energy source that will one day in the future enrich the lives of people all over the world.
This right here is, of course, Vegapunk's big dream. A limitless energy source meant to help all of humanity move into the future. And on paper, that sounds pretty dope, right? Like an incredible breakthrough. It's clean, it's infinite, could literally change the quality of life for everyone on the planet. This is the kind of thing that Vegapunk has always dreamed of, but here's the tragedy. We already know it won't just be used for good, because Vegapunk goes on to reveal,
the flame that I created was used to activate an ancient weapon.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal. Vegapunk basically admits that his invention was stolen, weaponized, and he puts the blame entirely on himself. Of course, we do know that York was the one who took the Mother Flame and is almost certainly reproducing it for the world government right now, but the guilt still weighs very heavily on Vegapunk, especially because, well, part of him, one of his satellites, York, is the one who stole a piece of the Mother Flame to begin with. He knows that the very thing that he created to help humanity has now become a spark for mass destruction. It already caused the destruction of Lulusia apparently, which in turn then raised the sea level, so what was supposed to be a gift to the world instead became a weapon against it. And that right there is, of course, a very much reoccurring theme that Oda keeps coming back to in One Piece. People must be responsible for their creations and what they can do, or else there will be bad consequences. We've seen that before, like with Frankie. He built battleships as a kid, just chasing his dream of making something cool and awesome, but those ships ended up being used by the government to frame his mentor Tom. The message is always the same. You should have the freedom to create and be proud of your creations, but if you aren't careful and responsible, your creations may be used for evil or even against you personally. Vegapunk's Mother Flame is the ultimate version of that dilemma. It could be humanity's salvation, or it could be the thing that dooms the entire world a second time. And I will say that Oda most likely is borrowing very heavily on, like nuclear power in our world, especially, with Japan's history of nuclear power. They have kind of been the victim of all crazy, nuclear events in the past, whether it was the war or, nuclear testing or whatever. So Oda probably, as many Japanese people, has a very strong opinion of nuclear power, which is also, clean, limitless energy, but has the potential to be weaponized and cause great destruction. And interestingly enough, which you could kind of connect to the nuclear debate too, Vegapunk moves on to then question why Joy Boy would even want to preserve these weapons at all to begin with.
I have inadvertently proven such a man-made disaster that what sinks the world is possible again. In the past, there were 3 ancient weapons, and Joy Boy attempted to preserve them for the future. Why would he do that for such a dangerous thing? Have we not sunk far enough? Who is the true evil here, and who fights the good fight? The day will come when all the answers are laid bare, and I warn you, that moment will happen when we reach the very precipice of the world's drowning.
Now, to me, this is probably the most fascinating part of the entire message. Vegapunk admits that he can't understand himself why Joy Boy would ever try to preserve weapons capable of ending the world. From his perspective, it makes no sense. Why keep these things around if they're the very tools that caused the first great disaster, or how many disasters there might have been? And I kind of get what he's saying here, right? But we do know Oda doesn't set up mysteries like this without a reason. There has to be something about the ancient weapons that we don't fully understand yet. Maybe, as destructive as they are, maybe they also have the power to reverse what was done. I've even had a theory that the One Piece world was originally terraformed in the past when, we know people came down from the moon after they ran out of resources. So what if the ancient weapons did that somehow and they're not actually meant to be weapons, they were just turned into weapons and used as such, but they're actually meant to build civilization? Like, somehow I just really think that there's so much more here that we just straight up don't know about them. We've always been told that they are these super weapons of mass destruction, but wouldn't it be just like the most Oda thing to be hiding their true purpose all along? Like, maybe they aren't just weapons of war, but when they're united with the right person, they're actually the key to restoring balance to a very clearly broken world. It's just one of the major mysteries of the Void Century, but Vegapunk, of course, doesn't just stop at Joy Boy. He then goes on to question the Raja pirates and why they have all been so very much silent.
The Void Century is still ripe with mystery. However, there are some who have learned the truth. The king of the pirates' crew. When they learned all of the true history, why did they drift apart without telling anyone? Why didn't they act on it?
This is where the weight of the message really hits home. Vegapunk admits that even though he's uncovered so much, there are still some huge gaps that even he can't fill. But the Raja pirates, of course, learned the entire truth. They have all the answers, and instead of acting or sharing it, with the entire world, they broke apart, walked away, and just kind of kept quiet ever since. Meanwhile, we see Rayleigh and Shanks just drinking themselves into oblivion while they listen to this, and Vegapunk's like, come on guys, spill the beans. That must really hurt a man like Vegapunk who just wants to use knowledge to help the world, and then here's a group of people who clearly has all the answers and they're keeping it to themselves. But if you really go and look into everything we know about the Roger pirates, then you should know that the reason Roger didn't move wasn't because he was selfish or scared, it was timing. The world wasn't ready yet because the one piece they needed was still missing. Roger said it himself at Laugh Tale. They were too early, which to me most likely means that the one who carried the power of Nika hasn't appeared yet. So instead of forcing a change, Roger chose to prepare the way for that person to rise instead, and that's why, instead of acting himself, he sparked the Great Pirate Era and left his crew behind at key points at the Grand Line to help the next Nika along the way. At least that's my headcanon at this point. But also, let's not forget that whatever they learned on Laugh Tale was probably pretty dark. Like Rayleigh says, hey, I hope you guys come to a different conclusion once you reach Laugh Tale. It doesn't sound like he was particularly happy about what he learned there. It might have been something really dark that they didn't really know how to deal with themselves. Now, after Vegapunk brings up Roger's choice, he then moves into what might be the biggest bombshell of all, his final message about the D-Clan. Now, this part is really different from the rest of the broadcast so far. Instead of one clean statement, it is stretched out over several chapters while all the chaos of Ekkat Island is still happening and ongoing. The Gorosei are literally blasting away at Emmet to destroy Vegapunk's broadcast transponder snail that's inside the giant robot, so the speech kind of keeps getting interrupted throughout it, but even within pieces, the message still hits really hard. He starts with this.
Lastly, I have one final message to impart. To those scattered throughout the world who bear the name of D, within you there is a...
And when I first heard this, I was like, no, tell us. But of course, no, all we got was a little bit of a tease, and then a little bit later, we hear a short line here.
That name.
What name? Like, it really makes you wonder if Vegapunk actually knew what the D initial actually stood for. It does seem that way, doesn't it? And then some more fragments come out as...
But actually, nothing of the sort, which you might consider a will inherited through the years. Can only pray that those at the mercy of this reason will be able to hear this message.
So, yeah, we sadly don't get the clean full version, and maybe we will get the missing parts in the future at some point, but even with all these interruptions, we can piece most of it together ourselves, I think. Vegapunk is basically saying, look, this name is not random. There's something inside all of you that gets passed down through the ages, a will that keeps moving forward. And that's really wild, because it takes what fans have been speculating about forever and puts it right in the story spotlight. Like, the Ds could be descendants of the ancient kingdom, or they might be Joy Boy's allies reborn across generations, or the D might literally stand for Dawn or Devil or something. I mean, we have a lot of Dawn symbolism in the story, with the first arc being called Romance Dawn, and almost every arc ending with Luffy bringing the new dawn. Even Wano, the big arc before Egghead Island, ends with the sunrise, right? The battle takes place during the night, then the dawn. And the big takeaway here really is this. Vegapunk made a point to address them directly. Out of everything he revealed about weapons, history, the Void Century, he still wanted to single out the D-Clan. It's like a big flashing sign that they're the ones carrying the thread of history, and they're the ones who will decide where everything leads down the future. Which kind of makes me even more curious why the world government lets the D-Clan members live at all. Like, they literally have a Monkey D garb working for them, so if the D-Clan is so important to the fate of the world, why aren't they doing more to end or control them like we saw them do with the Buccaneers or the Lunarians, right? But let's circle back around to the part that drives everyone crazy, the line that then gets cut off in his first statement where Vegapunk is saying there is something hidden within the D-Clan. So, what was he about to say? That's of course the billion-berry question. And I have a few ideas that I'll throw out there. Could be something like very abstract, like he was going to say a will or a dream. Maybe he was about to confirm that the Ds are literally defined by destiny that keeps pushing them to, oppose the so-called gods. Like maybe there's some genetic trait or something that makes them go against the established order, or maybe it's more personal than that. Like how every D we've seen carries a dream for the world that feels bigger than themselves. Luffy wants everyone to be free, Blackbeard wants to rule the world, you kinda get the idea. But the cutoff part could also be something much more literal, like Vegapunk's a scientist after all, so what if he meant something actual physical, something actually inside of the D like a key, or even some genetic hidden ability that directly connects them to the Void Century and the One Piece itself through some ancient technology. We already see that with Poseidon, an ancient weapon is actually kind of passed on through genetics. Now, the tricky part with thinking about genetics in One Piece is that it clashes a little bit with the idea that the Ds are a scattered group of Joy Boy's former allies, right? Like, we've seen humans who are Ds, giants who are Ds, marines who are Ds. I guess that's not a race, but you get the idea. So the idea, that this was all one family's bloodline is a little bit harder to believe at this point, and instead, the D may be something that people can choose to inherit as part of carrying on a dream. Either way, whatever the missing word was, it's gonna be absolutely huge. That single line might hold the final clue to how the entire story ends after all. Now, after dropping that incomplete bombshell about the D-Clan, Vegapunk shifts gears once again, and this time he drops another major warning. And if you were just a random person on a random island in the world, this is the part that I would be paying very close attention to.
History is told by the winners, and the losers at the bottom of the sea are so very faint. But the truth that was gleaned at the cost of so much sacrifice has at last been told to the world just now. I can only pray that this message has made it safely out to the world at large. It would be foolish to hear about a war 900 years in the past from only one side. History requires a multifaceted approach to understand entirely.
This is a really important conclusion, I think. Vegapunk is basically saying that you have to look at history from all angles if you want to truly understand it. Because if you just listen to one side, you'll probably get a super biased perspective, which, by the way, is not relevant at all to our current political landscape at all. Cough, cough. Anyways, Doflamingo basically told us the very exact thing. The pink fur-loving man here was spot on in saying that whoever wins gets to say what was right and wrong and write history. So you could read this part of Vegapunk's message as telling people not to automatically assume the government is wrong, but I think it works the other way around too. He might actually be planting the idea that people shouldn't automatically presume pirates like Luffy are the big villains either. Because again, you have to remember that most of the world still sees Luffy as a dangerous monster. The newspapers call him a threat, the government paints him as someone who wrecks entire islands and countries. Most people think he's a bad guy. But Vegapunk's words are like a counter to that propaganda. He's asking people to keep an open mind, to consider that maybe the people branded as chaotic or evil are actually the ones fighting for freedom, and the other way around. And right after giving his big warning about how history should never come from just one side, Vegapunk then caps things off with a final perspective, and he drops Roger's name to make it hit even harder.
25 years ago, the pirate Goldie Roger completed an unprecedented tour of the entire world, and what he and his crew heard were likely the purest voices of the past.
Classic Vegapunk. What he's basically saying, I think, is, look, Roger figured this out, he heard the truth, but the rest of the world has never heard it. They've only been fed the lies and cover-ups by the world government, and it lines up perfectly with Clover's speech way back in Ohara, where he said that history is also written by the victors. The poneglyphs are literally the voices of the defeated on the side that lost the war, and luckily, they were carved into stone that are indestructible, so their truth could not be erased. I kinda wonder if that purest voice bit that Vegapunk mentioned ties straight into the voice of all things, right? Like Roger had it, Luffy has it. Roger could hear partly the poneglyphs, though we don't know if he could only sense their locations or if he could interpret them somewhat or get a sense what they were about, but clearly he needed Kozuki Oden to actually read them word for word. But I do wonder if there's a secret message or something else on the poneglyphs that only someone with the voice of all things can understand, that even someone who can read the ancient language can't decipher otherwise. And just when you think that Vegapunk's done, he cracks it up even higher with another warning.
One day, the memories of the void century will be recalled, and mark my words, that day is coming. The sinking of the world's continents was a man-made disaster brought about by weapons which by someone's design still exist today. The machinations of history and fate seem to insist upon the obliteration of those last descendants of rare races.
So he's once again hitting on a lot of what he's already said here, but he also throws in this terrifying piece about history and fate seemingly wanting to wipe out rare races. Which here he's clearly talking about races like the Buccaneers and the Lunarians. We saw it in Kuma's backstory when Kuma's Buccaneer father was killed and Kuma was put into the God Valley hunting game. And if you look back to the Reverie arc, the Gorosei quite literally talk about needing another great cleansing, so this isn't just ancient history, it's still happening right now in the One Piece world. But then this next moment is what truly makes Vegapunk's speech one of the most iconic moments in One Piece history.
If the worst should come to pass, I want you all to take care of yourselves. No matter what should happen, I believe in the intelligence of mankind. I believe in science.
It does cut off for a moment here, but then he brings it home with,
Roger died 25 years ago. Whitebeard died 2 years ago. But the fall of these legends was merely the prologue of a new era. And now, these people who refuse to buckle under any and all suppression, they are the ones who are closest to the truth, ironically enough. Then again, perhaps it was Roger who sent them there. The person who winds up with it may not be the one Joy Boy desired. The fate of the world now rests in the hands of the one who finds it. The person who lays claim to the One Piece.
And that's huge. This is like Vegapunk's Whitebeard moment. He's saying straight up that the One Piece isn't just treasure, it's the deciding factor for the future of the world, and whoever will get their hands on it will shape what comes next. Now, the scary thing to think about is whether that lines up with Joy Boy's will or not, right? But no matter what the One Piece treasure is, based on everything that Vegapunk shared, it absolutely has to be tied to the will of D, because each D has a dream, and that dream could shape how the One Piece is actually used. Blackbeard's dream is to twist the world into whatever shape he wants it to, even if that means destruction. Luffy's dream is to create a world where everyone is free and no one goes hungry, like what he promised in Wano. So the One Piece becomes kind of like the ultimate canvas, and whoever claims it paints the future with their own dream with a big broad brush. And it's also worth pointing out the pattern here. This is now the third time in the story we've had a huge figure stand up and proclaim the importance of the One Piece and that it's real. First, Roger started it all, of course, then Whitebeard confirmed it during Marineford, and now Vegapunk is carrying the torch as well. Each of them passed the message along further, building the weight of that treasure into something way more important than just gold or silver. So if Vegapunk is right, then whoever finds the One Piece next decides everything and gets to finish what Joy Boy couldn't do way back 900 years ago, or just make things even worse, right? However, there's still one major clue that we still haven't discussed with Joy Boy and Vegapunk's message. You see, Joy Boy didn't just leave behind the poneglyphs, he also left behind his big symbol that connects all of his allies across the world. We talked about this. Again, this thing shows up in so many places, and after many years, I think I finally cracked the code for what it means and how it will completely change the end of the story. So if you want to learn all that and more, you should really click on this video right here where I explain the Bagua, that this thing is actually called in, mythology. And otherwise, thanks so much for watching. I hope that helped. And thanks to our Patreons. This was a fun video to make, and I will see you in the next one.